Hello and welcome to another episode of Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig, episode 68. I'm Craig.
And I'm Reza.
You forgot who you were there for a second, didn't you?
Yes, I forgot to read the script.
If you're new to our podcast, Reza and I are both English teachers with over 40 years of teaching experience between us, and we will help you improve your grammar, vocabulary and pronunciation. However, in this episode, we're going to be speaking about the TOEFL and IELTS tests. So if you are not particularly interested in these two tests, maybe you could give this episode a miss. Before we speak about the TOEFL and IELTS test, some feedback from Antonio Tenorio, who nominated us for a UK Podcasters Award. And Antonio says, I've been looking for a way to learn English through listening to podcasts, and I found this one, which is helping me a lot because it's the best I've ever met.
Ever met? Antonio, don't you mean I've ever heard?
Better, yeah, I've ever heard. Reza and Craig are very skillful in teaching English. Thank you very much.
Skillful at teaching English?
Skillful at, you're right, skillful at teaching English. And they create all their podcasts in order to convey the best to their listeners. I send you a big hug and please keep pushing and helping us to learn your great language. Thank you. Well, thank you to you, Antonio. We are very pleased to have you as a listener. So we spoke about the IELTS test in episode 15. So go to inglespodcast.com/15. And we also compared IELTS to Cambridge exams like the FCE, the CAE exam. So if you want to go back and listen to those two, that's inglespodcast.com/15 and /24. So today, Reza and I are going to go a little in depth, a little deeper into these two tests and answer questions like what the tests are, why you need them, how much do they cost, and how you can prepare for these tests. Now, Reza, you've been teaching, or you actually have experience in both of these tests, in IELTS and in TOEFL. So could you, for the listener, could you speak a little about what these tests are and maybe why the students need to take them?
Well, let me be honest right from the start. I do know about TOEFL, but I know the IELTS test a lot better. For the simple reason that there's not much demand for TOEFL tests in Europe. Whereas in America, North and South, it's quite the opposite. There's more demand for TOEFL. That is because the TOEFL test is geared towards North America, whereas the IELTS test is more international. Let's talk a little bit about the similarities and the differences.
So just before you go into that, Reza, so is it correct to say then that if you live in Europe or in Spain, it's probably better and more useful to take the IELTS test, but if you live in a Spanish-speaking South or Central American country in Latin America, it's probably more useful to take the TOEFL test. Is that right?
Not necessarily. Largely, it depends what you're going to do with it. Both tests are used for basically two main reasons: for study and for emigration. So
they're a level test, basically.
They
show the level of English so that you can go to study in university or get a job in a company.
Exactly, that's it. So university or similar study or getting a job. Those are the two main purposes. So they are not exams that you pass or fail. You don't pass or fail. You get your English tested and you're given an assessment of your reading, writing, speaking and listening. Right. So that whoever needs to know knows exactly what your ability is in English.
Okay, so let's look at the main differences then. Should we start with IELTS?
Yes, since IELTS is what I've taught more and know best, perhaps I should start with that. So IELTS stands for the International English Language Testing System. It's a collaboration between three bodies: the British Council, which is the United Kingdom government's cultural body and probably the most important English language teaching organisation in the world, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
No offence to any Americans, but it's a fact. Then IDP Ielts Australia. Yes, Australia. That is a mixture between a body representing Australian universities and a private recruitment and employment agency.
So if you're thinking of getting work and or studying in Australia, then the IELTS is a good test to have.
Definitely IELTS for Australia and New Zealand. There's no doubt about that. Yeah. The Australian government are very interested in IELTS and not particularly interested in TOEFL. Mm-hmm. And the third part of the collaborators for IELTS is Cambridge English Language Assessment. The same people who run what Craig mentioned earlier, First Certificate, Advanced Proficiency, etc. Those people are also involved in IELTS. So there's three agencies who run IELTS.
Right. And what's the test like, Reza? What kind of, obviously there's listening, reading, writing and speaking. Is it a similar test to the Cambridge FCE, CAE kind of test?
No, it's quite different in some ways, because when you do a Cambridge First Certificate Advanced Proficiency, you choose which one you're going to do. You do precisely either First Certificate or Advanced or Proficiency. You don't just do one test. In IELTS, there's just one test for everybody. So your level of English could be quite low. Let's say you're an A1 level. Or your level could be very high. You could be a C2 level, but you do the same IELTS test.
Right. But the actual exam or test itself, is it similar to the kind of exercises, the kind of reading and grammar exercises, the multiple choice, the listening? Are they similar exercises that you have to do?
Partly yes, partly no. So the similarity is that IELTS tests the four skills and it tests them separately. So there's a separate listening, a separate reading, a separate writing, and a separate speaking test. Now, as you'll see later, TOEFL, it doesn't work like that. Yeah, TOEFL is quite different. One important thing to know is that there are two strands to the IELTS test. There's the general or there's the academic. This only applies to the reading and writing. The speaking and listening are the same, whether you're general or academic. If you do the academic strand, that means you're interested in studying abroad, then the reading texts are a little bit more academic. They're not specialist, they're not technical, but they are more academic. Whereas if you do the general strand, the reading texts are not academic, although the type of questions are very similar. And in the writing, you have to do two pieces of writing. The first part is shorter. It's about 150 words, if I recall. And in the academic strand, you have to write about a diagram, for example, a bar chart, a graph, etc. So quite academic. Whereas in the general first writing question, you write a letter. The second question is the same for both. You have to write an essay giving your opinion. The general exam is for people who just want to emigrate, not necessarily to study. I would say that's the main thing to bear in mind if you're going to do an IELTS test. Do you want general or do you want academic?
And is the test usually written on paper or is it a computer-based test?
Extremely important question. To my knowledge, so far, it only exists on paper. There is only a paper version of the IELTS, and the speaking is done with a person, one-to-one, one examiner and one candidate, and it is recorded. And the speaking comes in three parts. The first part is giving a little bit of personal information. The second part, you're given a prompt card with a topic and 3 bullet points, and you get a bit of time to think about it, and then you have to talk about the topic. And then the last part, the third part, is supposed to be a conversation as natural as possible between the candidate and the examiner on a topic related to the prompt card in the second part. It takes about 11 to 14 minutes to do the speaking, and it's with a person, one-to-one, unlike the TOEFL.
Right. So before we move on to the TOEFL, just some prices on the web page, and the link to the web page will be in the show notes. It says that the price of the test is approximately 115 English pounds, which is about 190 euros, which is about 200 American US dollars. So that's the price of the IELTS test.
Roughly, depends where you do it.
Correct. Yeah, it varies. It depends where you do it. But just to give an idea of what you can expect to spend or invest in the test, about $200, give or take, more or less.
One thing I should mention, it may be important to some people who don't have a lot of time. You do the listening, reading and writing on one day as close together as possible, perhaps with a little break in the middle. Then the speaking for the IELTS may or may not be on the same day. Sometimes it is on the same day after a break, but it can be up to 7 days before or after the rest. The speaking can be up to 7 days before or after the other three parts for the IELTS test.
That sounds very similar to the Cambridge FCE, CAE, etc., and those kind of exams.
Yes, but there is one last difference, which is a great advantage of IELTS. In IELTS, you get your results after 13 days.
That's quick.
13 days. As you know, it takes much longer for the First Certificate Advanced and Proficiency Cambridge exams.
Yes, it does. Reza and I want to tell you now about something we like, don't we, Reza?
We do. It's italki.com. Many of you have been asking us via email, Twitter, and the website how you can improve your fluency in speaking. You're learning grammar, you're doing exercises, listening to us on this podcast, but how can you practice real communication? Well, the answer might be in italki.com. Have you heard of it, Craig?
I have heard of it. It's one of my favourite places for one-to-one teaching.
Well, in italki.com, Craig, you probably know that you don't need any apps or software. It's a very human connection. It's done person to person via the internet. You choose your teacher. They can be male, female, British, English, American, Australian, with all their different forms of English that those people speak. So you go there, you register, you search for a teacher, and then you buy italki credits, they call them ITC, and you find a teacher in your price range. So there are different prices for different teachers. There's no fixed price.
And what happens if you pay for a teacher and you don't like the teacher?
You change teachers. It's easy. Try them out. If they work for you, great. If not, try another teacher. And it's always one-to-one. So it's just you and the teacher.
So why don't you tell the listeners where they can go, Reza?
Well, if you go to inglespodcast.com/italki, that's ITALKI, italki, and there's a special deal. italki are offering listeners of Aprender Inglés con Rezi Craig 100 free italki credits, ITCs, when you sign up for their paid service. So it's buy one, get one free. You buy 100 and they give you 100 credits.
That sounds like a great deal.
Craig and I want to thank italki for sponsoring Aprender Inglés con Rezi Craig. We think they're the ideal service for our listeners to improve their fluency in speaking.
Okay, moving on to TOEFL, the TOEFL test. What does TOEFL stand for? What do those letters mean?
Well, it's also a test like the IELTS. It's not an exam. It's the test of English as a foreign language. And you will often see written TOEFL, or some people say TOEFL. TOEFL, IBT. IBT.
IBT.
Mm-hmm. I means internet-based test.
Ah, so it's a computer test. You can do it online.
Mm-hmm. There is also a PBT. Can you guess what the P stands for?
Paper?
Yes. But the PBT, the paper version, is only available in a very, very few places. It's much more likely that you will do the computer test whether you like it or not. The paper one is not widely available, so you're probably going to do the internet one, the IBT.
So who accepts TOEFL? Is it similar to IELTS in that it's universities and employers, those kind of things?
Yes, and also like IELTS, immigration departments.
Right.
So the UK Border Agency are very interested in IELTS for foreign students coming to study, for example. Also, the American Immigration Department is very interested in TOEFL for foreign students coming to study. Yes, quite similar there in that respect.
So if you're thinking of working abroad, then it's good to have this test to show.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about the format of the TOEFL, because it's quite different to IELTS. As we said, the TOEFL is probably going to be done on a computer, whereas the IELTS is done on paper. Also, I said that the IELTS tested each skill separately. The TOEFL, no. The TOEFL combines or integrates more than one skill together. For example, you might have to read, then listen, and then speak in response to one question, or listen and then speak, or first read and then listen, then write. It's a test that combines or integrates skills. That's interesting. Quite different to most English tests in that case. The TOEFL is always done in one day. Always.
Speaking, the reading, the writing, everything.
Yes. You might think, well, why can't IELTS do the same? Why can't they make sure every time that the speaking is on the same day? Well, simply because in the IELTS you need to speak to a person. In the TOEFL, no. You speak to a computer. That's right. I'll say it again. You speak to a computer. There is no person involved. You speak to a computer. You speak to the screen. You're wearing headsets, and the computer records what you say.
So there's no interaction. Nobody asks you questions.
There's interaction in the sense that you have to read and then listen and then speak in response to what you've read and listened to in the speaking, but you don't speak to a person. No, it's merely timed and recorded in the computer. If you're not used to that, you need to practice it, because it's very, very, very off-putting. It makes you feel very strange at the beginning talking to a computer screen. Because there's no response. You don't know if you're doing it well or badly, if they understand you. It's a computer screen.
Sounds like something out of science fiction.
Yeah. So in the speaking, you talk about familiar topics, but you also will be asked about campus situations and academic situations in the speaking of the TOEFL.
Right.
So it's definitely got an academic bias, because you will be asked about campus and academic situations in the TOEFL exam, in the speaking. That's for sure. It's not like the IELTS where there's the general strand and the academic strand, and the general students can avoid academic questions. In the TOEFL, you have to answer questions about academic or university life. In the reading, there are 3 or 4 passages. It's not fixed in the TOEFL. And there are a mixture of questions about it. All of this on a computer, of course. You read on the computer screen.
How long does the reading last?
The reading lasts between 60 to 80 minutes. It depends how many questions there are. Yeah. The listening lasts between 60 to 90 minutes. A long listening, because there are different types of questions. You listen to lectures, you listen to classroom discussions, conversations, then you answer questions.
And what do you do in the speaking part? And what do you do in the writing part?
In the writing, there are 2 questions, and it lasts 50 minutes, so less time than the IELTS. The IELTS is 1 hour. In the first question, you write an essay in response to reading and listening. So some reading comes up on the screen, then you listen, then you have to write something based on what you read and what you listened to. So as I said, integrating skills. In the second question, You're simply given a topic and you have to write about it, giving your opinion on that topic, similar to the IELTS.
Right. Well, that's a good overview, a good resuming of the TOEFL exam. And as I said at the beginning, we'll be putting links and general information on the website in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/IELTS TOEFL. That's IELTS TOEFL.
Of course, there are other English tests and English exams, Craig, but they're not so well known. But by all means, our listeners might want to investigate them. For example, the people who organize IELTS, they're called ETS. They also organize an exam called TOEIC, TOEIC, which is very popular in Japan, but not in many other countries. I don't know any Spaniard, for example, who's ever taken it, but I've met many Japanese people who have. An exam called GRE and another called the Praxis Series. All of those are organized by the same people who organize TOEFL, ETS they're called. And then there are other exams which are neither IELTS nor TOEFL nor ETS organized exams, such as, have you heard of the Pearson Test?
I have. That's a worldwide level test backed by Pearson.
Yeah. British universities and Australian and some Americans, as well as IELTS, usually accept results of the Pearson Test.
I interviewed recently someone from busu.com, and they have a deal with Pearson, and they are running the Pearson exam. I can't remember the name of it now, but if you go to inglespodcast.com/Jason, you'll hear the interview in which we spoke about that test, that Pearson test, and what it's for, how it can help you, and where you can do it.
Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention about TOEFL, and I'd be interested to know about the Pearson and other exams, the results. For IELTS, it was 13 days to get the results. For TOEFL, it's approximately 10. Approximately, so it can be longer.
It's still quite quick, though.
It's still quick. So they're more or less the same. For both tests, within 2 weeks, within a fortnight, you've got your results.
And also, very important, the money. The TOEFL test is between $150 and $225 US. The test is usually $160 to $180 US. Although I think you know someone who recently paid $200, so it varies. Yes. It's different.
I haven't finished. In fact, I am preparing someone for a TOEFL test, and they're going to take the test in Barcelona in a couple of weeks, and it costs them $200.
Right. So just to briefly summarize, I don't know if you agree, Reza, but it seems to me that choosing which test between the IELTS test, the TOEFL test, and the others you've mentioned very much depends on what your ambitions are for the future and what your potential future university or job position asks for.
Yes.
So I think first check with them, think about your future plans and ambitions, and depending on that, choose an exam.
Yep. I would say as a general guide, if you're sure you want to go to North America, do the TOEFL. If you're sure you want to go to Europe, or you're not sure where you're going to go, Europe or North America or Australia, in that case, do the IELTS. That's my general advice.
Sounds like very sound advice, very good advice. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, if you'd like to ask, well, not me, but Reza, who knows more about these two tests, please send us an email or record your voice and send us a sound file on our website at inglespodcast.com. You can also write directly to Reza at belfastreza@gmail.com. On next week's episode, Telephone English. But until then, it's goodbye from Reza.
And cheerio from Craig.
See you soon. The music in this podcast is by Pitts. The track is called See You Later. And thank you very much for listening.